My name's Monk Rowe for the Phileas Jazz Archive, and I'm very pleased to have Bill Mays with me this morning, composer, pianist, and a guy who seems to have been very busy for like 60 years.
Boy, am I tired. Yeah, I've been busy. I started playing professionally when I was 15, and I'll be 82 in February. So I've had a long career.
I'd like to do a
Most of it
little
a lot of fun.
I'd like to do a little compare and contrast here. Looking at your itinerary on your website, I noticed one of your last gigs was at the Norton Museum of Art. And can you just tell me a little bit about that gig?
Well, it was a couple of Sundays ago. There's a wonderful collection, very eclectic, small by comparison with big museums, the Norton Museum of Art in West Palm Beach. And I had done a program for them 3 years ago called A Brief History of Jazz Piano, where I did about 22 piano players, starting with Jelly Roll, going up to, I think I ended with Herbie Hancock. No, I ended with Rini Rosnes. But that was the program I did there 3 years ago. You're asking about what I did a couple weeks ago. I picked 80 of my favorite pieces of art from the collection, and they put them up on a big screen for 60 seconds each, and my bass player and I played music that was appropriate to each segment. I had divided it into 9 segments: women, flowers, New York City, political protest, and we picked songs and played, and we did some free improvising too as we looked at the screen.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, can you compare that with your first gig when you were 15?
When I was 15, I got called by a father-son team. They both played the banjo, and they needed a pianist for their gig at the Gay 90s Pizza Parlor in Pleasant Hills, California. I was going to high school in the East Bay area. And I didn't know very many tunes. I didn't know much about jazz. I had recently heard Earl Father Hines and the Miles Davis Band in San Francisco, which completely flipped me and turned my head around and opened my ears. But what they did, they gave me a fake book, and they said, learn Jada, The World is Waiting for a Sunrise, Katie, and other gems. There was a gut bucket player, that is a wash tub overturned with a broomstick handle and a cord, a clothesline cord. No tone to speak of, but he had a good beat, and the 2 banjo players. That was my first professional gig, and I think I kind of remember making $10 a night, which was probably a lot of money in the late 50s.
Yeah, you could when you got a car, you could fill up your tank.
Yeah, many times over.
When they
It's a
said,
great,
what do you
yeah.
think they meant when they said learn these tunes? What were they expecting from you? Accompaniment style, or did you have to play the melody?
No, they handled the melody. They wanted me to keep time. So I locked in with the the gut bucket player, and this was an upright piano with thumbtacks and the hammers to get that old barroom Western piano effect. And the 2 banjo players, father and son, were sitting up on the top of the piano, so I'm looking at their feet on the left and the right of me. And as I remember, I just kept time, and I did some rudimentary improvising. I don't know how they got my name, and I don't know why they called me, because I had very, very little experience playing that kind of music. I did have a lot of experience as an accompanist because I played for the choir and singers in my father's church, and I had a little combo with a couple guys, a trumpet player and a bass player, and I was doing some arranging for that group. Again, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no books. I had no instruction manuals like we have today, and it was just hit and miss. Try this. What sounds good? Well, that sounds good. That doesn't sound good. And why doesn't it sound good? And I would just figure it out as I went. So I think that started me on my self-taught, self-starter kind of way of learning.
There's a lot to be said for that. You
Yeah.
develop your own style. I think the things you learn to do and not to do really make a strong impression on you when you're trying it on your own. Your friend and sometimes bandmate Alan Broadbent described that when you bring in an arrangement and you hear it for the first time, he called it the cringe moment.
Also, the joy moment. It's so great to, especially if you're working with a big band or orchestra like Alan does a lot, and I do from time to time. It's such a joy to hear it with live instruments. Now we can mock it up on synthesizers, and before, in the old days, we couldn't. We just played and heard it on the piano. But it's the cringe moment, but also joyous when it all comes together and it works.
So,
And it's great. We had workshops back in the day. I remember I was a member of the BMI Writers Workshop in New York with Bob Brookmeyer and Manny Album, and we'd bring things in and try them, and they worked or they didn't, and we talked about why they didn't and fixed it. And it's yeah.
when you were in your teens, after the banjo experience, did you have a choice of what you were going to do with your life? Do you have something to decide?
Yeah, Miles Davis and hearing Earl Father Hines live, and also some pivotal records that I heard at around the same time, age 14, 15. Howard Rumsey and the Lighthouse All Stars, Charlie Ventura, Vito Musso, a lot of saxophonists now when I think of it, Brubeck, Desmond. Um, I loved what I heard, and I knew somehow I wanted to do it. I didn't know what that meant, but I took every opportunity to play music with other people as it arose. And I took every little gig that was offered. Something that I did in the early days of my career. I didn't turn anything down. I wanted to make money, and I wanted to only do music, not have a day gig, and I wanted to grow and learn. And I really value the weddings and the club date experiences, as painful as they might have been sometimes, but they were learning experiences, musically, and also in how to get along with people and slide with the situation.
Yeah,
Be a
slide for the
team,
situation. I
be a
like that.
be a good team member,
Yeah.
which I think is incredibly important if you want to be a professional musician. So, but when I heard those people and those records, I just fell in love with jazz, and that began also a period of just, again, figuring things out on my own. If I heard something that Oscar Peterson or Bill Evans or McCoy Tyner did, I'd sit at the piano and play it, and I would notate it, and I would transpose it around the keyboard. So I was learning, yes, licks and patterns and full solos at the time. And in so doing, it taught me how to become an improviser. That was part of the experience. And then, I left, instead of going to college, I joined the service, and I was a musician in the Navy for almost 4 years. That was an invaluable experience to learn to play lots of different styles and to play small group combo music and big band music. And I did some writing in that regard too. And all of this was before I was 21, got out of the service at age 21 and joined the union. And I started 4 years of professional work in San Diego that was like 7 days a week. It was incredible. I got hooked up with a busy band leader contractor, and I also had some great jazz compadres and an influential pianist, Mike Wofford, whom I used to go out and listen to a lot in San Diego. He was a big influence on my playing. So I was very successful as a working musician those 4 years in San Diego. Then I moved to Los Angeles in 1969.
Did you have to sell your parents on this career path?
Well, I tried. My father wanted me to be a minister, and I wanted to be a musician, and it was very meaningful that years and years ago, my dad came to a concert in Italy where I was playing with Jerry, and at the end of the concert, he said, "I always wanted you to be a minister, and you became one in your
Oh,
music and how you touch people," and that was a wonderful moment.
I bet. Speaking of wonderful moments, your move up to Los Angeles, and can you recall the feeling of perhaps nervousness, anticipation, the first time you did a significant studio date?
Well, okay, the first recording studio date I did, back in those days, there were a lot of TV shows that had live bands. Sonny and Cher, Glenn Campbell, Carol Burnett come to mind. They had rehearsal pianists, and those were guys that worked with a choreographer and band leader in mapping out medleys. And I was working on the Oral Roberts TV show. He was a Christian faith healer who also had a university in Oklahoma. I'm sure most people know of him. And he had this television show with a choreographer. I was the rehearsal pianist on it. One day, the regular pianist who did the pre-records, they would pre-record a lot of the music for the show. And Mike Lang was his name, dear friend of mine, now passed. Mike couldn't make the pre-record, so the contractor said, well, have Bill Mays fill in for Mike because he's been doing rehearsal piano on the show, and I did. And I don't remember being nervous. I remember being excited that I was able to do my first studio recording date, and that was one of the reasons that I moved to Los Angeles from San Diego. I wanted to get into the studios, and I also wanted to play with some of the jazz musicians that I'd admired on records and heard about and was able to do. Among them, the first that come to mind are Buddy Collette and Bud Shank, Connie Condoli, Shelly Manne, Red Mitchell. So I was leading a happy double life as a jazz musician and a studio player for 15 years in Los Angeles.
Must have been a big decision to move to the, across the country to New York after you've established yourself in Los Angeles. What was the impetus for that?
I'm crazy. I don't, I'm fearless. I moved to Los Angeles with $50 in the bank, seriously. And I don't think I had one contact. I knew Terry Trotter, the marvelous pianist, and through his records. And I called Terry before I got to Los Angeles and told him I was going to be moving up and I'd love to meet him. And we became friends. We used to play four-hand classical music at his Steinway. And Terry recommended me for some gigs almost immediately. And then I fell in with other musicians like Mike Lang and Charlie Shoemake, Bobby Shoe, and I got my name around town fairly quickly. I also started studying with an excellent classical teacher there, Victor Aller, and I told him that I wanted to break into the studios, and what did he think? What did I need? And he helped me immensely with tone production, with sight reading, and within a year I was doing studio work. So it was a quick learning experience. And then I spent 15 years, as I said, and I left in 1984. One of the reasons I left is that studio keyboardists were becoming less pianists and more synthesizer programmers. And I'd been very successful doing this, and I didn't want to keep doing it the rest of my life again for some of the same reasons that I moved to Los Angeles. I wanted to leave LA so that I have an opportunity to play with people in New York, which I did. I got the gig with Jerry Mulligan immediately, and got a chance to play with Al Cohn and Bob Brookmeyer and the Vanguard Band, and the list goes on. So
Before we leave Los Angeles, so to speak, I wanted to read two quotes from gentlemen who were incredibly successful in that scene, but they had different feelings about it. And they'll remain anonymous, but I know that you would know of them. The first fellow said, LA is an incredible place for craft. You really learn to play your instrument, to play in tune, show up on time. All of the essentials for craft are there. But your soul, your spirit, is not usually nurtured. The second fellow said, our job was to go in there and play with one another, which we took great joy in doing. And whatever the music is, man, we'll just nail it. So that was soul gratifying, just to do that, regardless of the artist.
Well, I certainly agree with the second quote, and the first one sounds pretty pessimistic. And I knew a lot of great studio players who could also play jazz. I won't mention names, but they would not go out and play jazz. Then there were people like Bud Shank and Shelley Mann who were great studio musicians and also loved jazz and kept their jazz careers going at the same time, as I did. I really enjoyed studio work 90% of the time. I enjoyed the craft. I enjoyed playing various instruments, harpsichord, organ, synthesizers, electric piano, calliope.
You played a calliope, eh?
I did, on a movie that Lalo Schifrin wrote the score on. It was called Roller Coaster. And interestingly, the whole score was just for keyboard instruments. I think there were 6 or 7 of us. And pipe organ was on that score too. It's a terrible movie, but a great score. But at the same time I was doing studio work, I was playing jazz. The only thing I couldn't really do was go on the road for extended periods of time, because as a studio player then and now, if you get a call with a contractor, you want to take it so that you get the next one and the next one. And if you're out touring a lot, you can't. But I would have died emotionally and spiritually if I had only done studio work. I had to be doing, not that it wasn't creative at times. We didn't just play the written note, but we were often called upon to improvise, to sound like, get me the shearing sound, give me some Floyd Kramer, can you cop some Jerry Lee Lewis on this, So it was challenging and fulfilling to do that work, but I also, I was probably playing jazz, I don't know, 7 to 10 nights a month while I was doing the studio thing, because there was a lot of work in LA for jazz at that time. There were a lot of clubs and places to do concerts. So I had a double life going and enjoyed it very much.
And along the way, you felt compelled to become a composer. Can I ask you what kind of circumstances you're inspired by to compose something?
I hadn't thought of it for decades, but when you just asked that, there was an ice cream truck in our neighborhood that had a little tune that went ba da 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 ba do be da 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 dee up, and he would drive around and sell snow cones and fudgesicles. My first composition, I wrote an arrangement and I extended his little theme. I don't know what I called it, and I don't remember what it was written for, instrumentation wise. But that's where the inspiration for that came from. Uh, I also was as a member of Bobby Schu's quintet for many albums and many years. Bobby encouraged me to contribute to the band, and I think I had started making my own compositions as a kid, but I didn't really. It was usually driven by circumstance. I mean, not that I didn't just sit at the piano and write for fun and just let's see where this goes, but a lot of it was because I was in somebody's band and they encouraged me to bring in some material. Inspiration, here's another interesting story. I was taking a course in English literature at Pierce Junior College in LA in my spare time. And I had a great teacher, and she got us into the Greek classics, and I learned about the Greek goddesses of music and poetry, and that inspired a song called Euterpe, which Euterpe was was a goddess of poetry and music. And I was working at the time on a lot of Percy Faith's orchestra albums. And Percy asked me one day after I'd been on 2 or 3 of his albums, he said, "Do you compose?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, bring me something that you've written." I brought him Euterpe, and he said, "I'd like to put this on my next album." And he did. And he said, "What did you have in mind for it?" I said, "I hear it as a flute feature." And he said, "Well, I hear it as an acoustic guitar with orchestra, and I think Tommy Tedesco would handle it beautifully." And that's the way it was recorded. And Percy did a beautiful arrangement on my tune.
That's a great story, and it sort of leads me to you remember in Downbeat magazine they would do these blindfold tests.
Oh yeah, God,
Yeah.
I'm glad I never got asked to do one.
Well, now I'm asking you to do one. So tell me what this, if you recognize this.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, I recognize it. It's a group called REL. It's flute, violin, and harp, and the singer is Heidi Grant Murphy. Am I right?
You are right.
Yeah, and I wrote for 2 of their albums. And it was interesting. I didn't know a lot about writing for harp at the time. This was maybe 15, 20 years ago when we did these records. And so I read the books on Kent Keenan and the orchestration books, Mancini's, on the basics of harp writing, and then I wrote some passages and took them to a couple of harp players that I was doing studio work with in New York and said, "Would you play this and tell me what's wrong or what's right," and blah, blah, blah. And that's how I learned how to write for harp. And that particular group, not having guitar or keyboard, I was able to use the harp in a variety of ways. There's a bossa nova on one of those records where she's playing a guitar like bossa, full chord figures. And the main thing that I needed to learn in that regard was pedal changes and writing chromatically and how to notate it. But there again, it brings back the point we made earlier about the necessities of mother of invention. I had to learn and learn quick what would work and what wouldn't on the harp. That was a great trio, and they were lucky enough to get Heidi Grant Murphy, a wonderful opera singer, to be part of that.
All right, let me try this one.
Yeah, yeah, that's Sunday in New York, and it was part of I was commissioned to write a program that I decided we would call New York State of Mind for the WDR Big Band in Cologne. And it was about 10 years ago. And we also did that program with the U.S. Air Force Airmen of Note. And the project included Marvin Stamm, my wonderful friend and great trumpet player, and Marvin and I were the featured soloists, along with soloists in the band on that project.
When you get
And
a
that
commission,
particular, sorry?
when you get a commission, do you prefer that you be wide open to decide what to do, or do you prefer some guidance? I mean, what kind of guidance usually comes with a commission?
Yeah, I love both. I love being complete. In this instance, there were no parameters given except we want you and Marvin to come and be the soloists. You pick the material, you title the production. So that was completely wide open. Um, I chose tunes that were related to 52nd Street theme, Broadway Boogie by Ornette Coleman, All Across the City, Jim Hall. There's a boat leaving soon for New York, etc., etc. And I wrote an original called Manhattan Soliloquy. But then there are projects like, well, when I worked with Mark Murphy or when I worked with Ann Hampton Calloway as an arranger for their records, they would sit at my elbow and hum a line and say, I'd like this to be the intro, make something of that. And, or they'd have very specific suggestions about the form of the arrangement. And I enjoyed that as well. It took some of the pressure off to have their input and their direction. So I like working either way. Another contrast, I did an album for Morgana King called Simply Eloquent, and she gave me the list of tunes and her keys and said, just be Bill Mays and do what you want and send me the stuff in advance. So I did all the charts and did a mock-up. This was before synthesizers, a piano mock-up, and sent her material, and she learned it and came to the date. Now, that gave rise to an interesting incident. She hadn't learned the verse to Gershwin's Let's Call the Whole Thing Off. So she was having a little problem with it. We're in the studio, the clock is ticking, and the band is waiting, and I'm singing her the verse, trying to teach it to her, and she says, well, you sound great, you sing it. And I said, what are you talking about? It's your date. She said, roll the tape, you sing it. So I did, and I ended up on the record. I think it was the first time I'd ever sung on anybody's album. And then that opened Pandora's box. You can't shut me up. I love to sing, and I've sung on several of my recordings since, for good or for better or for worse.
Okay. Well, you're batting 1,000 here. Here's another one.
Yeah, Bobby Shoe.
I love this accompaniment you came up with.
You know, that straight eighth note stuff in the right hand, where do those things come from? I was very aware of Ellington and Coltrane's duo recording, and Ellington played something like that on one of the songs. I also played a lot of Ravel piano music. That idea, you know, I think as an orchestrator a lot when I'm playing piano, and especially in a duo setting where there's no other texture, I'm really thinking as an orchestrator. So that was an album called Telepathy that Bobby Shoe said, let's just go into the studio without any charts and play some tunes we love. And I think we also did a couple completely free things that
Yeah. It's a
went
marvelous
well.
record. Was that particular accompaniment spontaneous?
Yes, I think the album
The
was
whole
pretty much
record was. Yeah.
yeah, it was first takes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I got one more for you.
Yeah. Monks, well, you needn't. And I, I'm not sure. I recorded it several times. Is it just me?
It's just you, solo piano, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Um, I don't know where it's from. It might be a live broadcast I did somewhere, uh, or
I
it
was,
might be
I was
from a
curious
record.
about the that one section, that excerpt. You're doing these dissonances like you got into it. And it's almost like I was wondering the how much sight looking at the piano affects your improvising decisions. I mean, it's almost like you decided I'm going to play a half step dissonance for a few measures here and really milk it for what it's worth.
Well, I didn't make a decision, and I'm not looking at the piano. I'm. I guess I hit that second, that dyad dissonance, and liked it, and just carried it through. I'm having a conversation with myself when I'm playing. I'm playing off of myself when I'm playing solo, just like I'm playing off the bass player and the drums when I'm in a duo or a trio situation. And I'm making these decisions in a nanosecond as we go. I'm not mapping it out in advance.
That's
Maybe sometimes I play something and that works and I continue that pattern knowingly, but more often than not, it's just part of the ongoing conversation. You
a good
know,
way to put it. It's like the I love the mystery of improvising. I've asked the question many times,
oh yeah.
what are people thinking about, etc. And I think it's sort of wonderful that there is no concrete answer.
Well, it's interesting you because the trio record that I just released called Soundscape with my current trio of Ron Vincent and Dean Johnson, I wrote in my notes that people ask me sometimes, what are you thinking about when you're improvising? And I said in the notes, I'm thinking about nothing. I'm aware on a subliminal level of the arc, the form, the underlying harmonies of what I'm playing, if I'm playing a structured piece as opposed to a free piece. And but I'm not thinking G7, A flat 7. It's just all internalized at this point in my playing career. And I'm trying to be just in touch with my feelings and out of touch with everything else around me. And so that is true in the recording studio as well as in the concert hall. I'm really lost in the creative experience. There is no other activity I engage in except meditation where I'm that lost to my surroundings, and it's so beautiful. And it's the reason that I keep playing music, and it's the reason that I just am in love and full of joy when I'm in that experience. And man, I talk to young people and young students. I say, if you're not experiencing that kind of joy most of the time, then something's wrong. And let's talk about what's wrong. Is it the editor sitting up on your shoulder? Is it lack of preparation? Is it fear of what other people are going to think? Let's talk about that and let's work through that.
You think
Well, I got
joy?
off on a tangent there.
No, no,
Sorry.
I love tangents. I'm wondering if you think joy has become something that the current generation of jazz musicians, how do I phrase this? Seems less important than gravitas. I just got a
Hmm.
letter from a former student who witnessed a jazz trio in a club in San Francisco, I guess, and he just described it as if it was they were fighting them to get something out to the audience. Actually, that they just were playing for themselves, and it was like a competition, a athletic competition or something. I'm not verbalizing my question very well, but joy does not seem to be as much a part of jazz as it used to be.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking as over the last 6 months of groups that I've heard where it was joyful, where they were locked in, where it was effortless, um, and they were communicating to me. And then I'm remembering groups where it's more like what you just described, where they sound like they're trying to impress me with how fast they can play or how many notes they can play. I guess what I really want to hear in other groups when I go to listen and what I want to give when I play is a sense that we're listening to one another, communicating, we're playing off of each other, we're making a group musical painting, and we're playing the musical situation. You know, uh, I'm going to play differently on a real slow ballad like Lush Life than I'm going to play when I'm playing a walking ballad like Darn That Dream. And I'm going to play a little differently if I'm playing it solo than I'm playing with a trio. I think the key here, I'm getting off into the weeds. I don't really know where I'm going at this moment. I think what's important is, and this is sounds kind of corny, but to try to be as agenda-less as possible, to try to let the music chart the direction. Listen to one another, let the music take it where it wants to go. Don't try to force the issue. Try to be as agendaless as possible.
You know, Bill, I quoted a couple of musicians earlier in this interview, and I believe I'll be quoting you in some of my future ones.
Uh-oh.
That was a great statement.
Well,
Let's talk
thanks.
about bass players, um, which made me. The reason I went that direction is because that last little piano excerpt I played, you had taken your left hand became a walking bass, and over the years, I'm sure you've worked with many bass players, sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance. What do you like or not like to get from a bassist?
Well, I want him to be in tune. I want him to be just a tiny, tiny bit on top of the beat generally. I want him to be able to play with the bow because I use arco in a lot of my presentations. They need to be good readers some of the time if it's a project that requires that. And then I played with bass players who weren't good readers but had tremendous ears. I want them to be supportive and contributive. I want them to be able to just play time and keep it really basic sometimes. And then I want them to know when I want them to dialogue with me. Um, and I played with such a wide variety of bass players who had such different sounds and feels and approaches, from Ron Carter to Ron McClure, Red Mitchell to Ray Drummond, Martin Wynn to Dean Johnson, Tommy Cecil, Todd Kuhlman. I'm leaving out dozens of bass players that I played with and loved, but I'm trying to make a point that I've learned from all of them that ability to walk bass for oneself. was scared to death of that 50 years ago. When I moved to New York and played duo music a lot of the time because of the confines of the club or the budget or whatever it was, that gave me both the courage and the ability to accompany myself in a solo situation, walking bass lines. It's tricky because my right hand is going to lay a little bit behind the beat, and hopefully my left hand walking the bass is going to be just right in the middle or a little bit on top, so we don't drag and slow way down. That's what's comfortable for me. But what was the question?
Well, we were just talking about the difference in from one bassist to the
Oh, what
next,
do I like?
and
Yeah.
what don't you want the bass player to do?
Get high or drink. Uh, I won't name names, but I had to fire one, the only person I had to let go due to drug use. And then there were others that drank or smoked too much, and the time always came down, and it's a drag. Nothing is worse when you're playing duo or trio if the time's not in the pocket. If it's rushing or it's dragging, it's just a drag. There ain't no rush to it
It's
for me.
literal
It's a
drag,
drag.
yes.
Yeah, and
So,
so that's requirement number one. Yeah, I guess I answered that question.
yeah, I think you
It
did.
surprised you.
In a trio situation with bass and drums, like who's driving the bus between those two people?
Well, it varies on the twosome. Yeah, who's driving the bus? If sometimes it's the bass player, sometimes it's the drummer. Sometimes the drummer is playing a little on top of the beat, a little too far, and the bass player will hold it back, or vice versa. Sometimes it's just perfect. And most of the time it's just perfect because I call the right guys.
Yeah, there's a learning curve to that, and I'm sure that you
I mean,
passed it a long time ago.
I remember I did an album called The Ellington Affair for Concord Records, all Duke and Billy Strayhorn tunes. And I'd never played with it, Lewis Nash and John Goldsby in a trio setting. I'd played with them in other groups. And I put them together for the date. We didn't have a rehearsal. We just came into the studio, and man, the recording is beautiful. And because it was the right guys, they just locked it in from the minute we hit, and it was magic. So, and I think it was magic because both those guys had had a ton of experience with different bands and different styles, and so it came together beautifully.
As you had all that experience,
Yeah.
including accompanying vocalists, which is a whole other bag, I think. And you mentioned a couple of vocalists who were very prepared, some not as much. It's an adventure, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a matter of going in and playing the situation. I'm going to play pretty much, just basically when I'm playing for a singer, I'm going to play less fills than than I'm going to play as few fills this as I can to still do the right thing. I'm going to voice my chords in such a way that I'm not colliding with their note. If she's singing an A flat, I'm not going to play an A flat, flat 9 with the A on top, the flat 9 on top. I'm not going to push and lead the way. I think where excellent pianists who aren't excellent accompanists err often is they're not listening to the singer and waiting for the singer to finish the phrase and take their breath and They're moving it ahead too fast. So it's a matter of listening well to the singer and voicing your chords in the right register of the piano and in an intelligent way. I learned a lot about that from trial and error as a young accompanist in church. And then I learned watching and listening to Jimmy Rolls accompany singers and Mike Wofford and Bobby Tucker, and the list goes on. Great accompanists. I also learned a lot about accompanying singers by listening to the arrangements that Billy May and Heine Bow and Gordon Jenkins and Nelson Riddle did for singers. When I worked the brief stint with Sinatra that I did, I was in an orchestra surrounded by all these notes that I'd heard on the records. It was a real thrill. Bill Miller, Sinatra's longtime accompanist, was on the podium conducting, and then they were trying him out as conductor. That's why I was at the piano for 2 or 3 weeks. And he said, we were playing some arrangement, and he said, play less, play less, play less. So that was a good lesson.
Um, what is an annoyance to you in the music business? That's a broad question, but I'm thinking in trio settings. You seem like a fairly calm person to me. What gets under your skin?
Well, used to get under my skin talkers in the audience, and I saw Phil Woods and Rob McConnell handle it in their way, and I was surprised they didn't get shot. And then I've handled it in my way. Once I was playing at a club in La Jolla, and this couple was sitting right next to the piano talking about redecorating their house. Well, honey, I think we should go with pink in the bedroom, and maybe the bathroom should be blue. No. So after 2 minutes of it, I turned off and I said, I think you should go with purple in the bedroom. And once I said, if I'm hearing you talking while I'm playing, you're talking too effing loud. Well, that's the old me. Nowadays, I just don't take gigs in places where there's going to be talking. I've got the luxury of, I can turn down work that I don't really want to take. And especially here in Florida, people have called me to play in bars and clubs, and they're great musicians, and I wish I could, but I just don't want to go and play where people aren't really listening. So that limits my workability, but it's out of self-defense.
Yeah, it's nice that you have that liberty now to make those kind of choices. I sliding back to composing and arranging. I caught this quote probably from your website that you said deadlines are great inspiration.
Well, I used to put off everything till the last minute, including getting to the airport at the last minute. And as I became older, I got tired of all the pressure I was putting myself under. So I get to the airport 2 hours in advance always. And if I have a chart, well, I'll give you an example. I'm working on a Valentine's Day concert. That's 2.5 months away. The music's almost all arranged for that. And I don't know, I don't want to be in a panic situation, but deadlines, I once had to write something overnight for Ann Hampton Callaway and the New York Philharmonic, an arrangement on I Hear Music. So I was up all night doing that. I had to do it. I said yes to the gig. So deadlines are great to get you off your can, to get it done. And, Bob Brookmeyer used to say when he had a writing assignment, he'd start in advance and he would write and throw away everything that he wrote in the first 2 days to get rid of the BS and get the juices flowing and to get honest with himself. That's tough to throw away stuff, but that was a lesson well learned.
And I wonder, have you made the transition from pencil and pad, score pad, to uh, Sibelius or Finale?
Well, I do it both ways. I sometimes write at the keyboard with Finale open, and sometimes it's with pencil and paper. It depends on the situation. If it's a small ensemble and I really kind of have the arrangement in my head, I'll often forego pencil and paper and just hit it with the keyboard and use a 3 or a 4 staff layout, you know.
You said your wife is a visual artist, a painter,
Yes.
and I wonder if there is a similar question that you both might deal with on occasion, and that is, when is something done?
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, there's at least 2 ways that I've seen her work and that I work. One is to kind of map it out and see the big picture of the piece, be it the painting or the music piece. The other way is to not have an idea of where it's going and just noodle, just fool around, just play and see where it goes, paint and see where it goes. But how do we know when it's done? I guess it's more defined as to the end if we've mapped it out in advance. And by mapping it out in advance, you know, if it's an arrangement on body and soul, I map out, okay, I want to have an 8-bar intro, state the melody, saxes and trombones there, woodwinds there. Let's have a piano solo, half a chorus, a bass solo. Let's take it back to the bridge and take it out. Very proscribed. If I'm making a composition just kind of freely going where I'm going, not knowing where it ends, I guess some inner logic, something that makes sense to me at the moment says, this is the end. And then that gets tried out on the keyboard or with the band, and I say, yeah, that is the end, or no, it's not, and then I make an adjustment and write more material or end it a little sooner.
You ever get, you ever like not, quote, not be working, but your mind is actually working on some little issue with an arrangement and you solve it in your head and then go fix it or complete it?
Well, yeah, when I get stuck, it's great to go read something in a book I'm reading at the time, or go for a swim or a bike ride, and often I come back and it's just there. Getting away from it. I think sometimes we tend to hammer on a musical conundrum, thinking that if I just keep going, if I just keep trying, the answer's going to come, when sometimes it's great and necessary just to step away from it completely.
Yeah.
Sometimes putting it in another key, physically, just moving it. I've been working with it in B flat. Let me put it in D. And that changes my perspective, and that gives me some answers that were not forthcoming in the other key. Sometimes trying it with a different feel. I had my mind set this was going to be in 3/4. Well, let me change it. Let me try this in 5 and see how it works. That's how an arrangement came to me on Indian Summer from my Summer Sketches album. I wanted to do the tune because I loved the tune and it fit the theme of the album, but it wasn't working in 4/4, so I gave it a straight 8th feel and reharmonized it a bit and put it in 5, and the arrangement came about very quickly.
You
So
and I
there
have lived through
devices.
we've lived through some amazing changes in technology that affect music, and I wonder what are the positive and negatives in your mind with
Well,
technology?
the first thing that comes to mind is, in the old days, we had to print out the music, copy the parts from the score that we wrote on in pencil, and take them to the post office and mail them. Now I can put the part in Finale, extract the parts, make PDFs, and email them to the band members 3 weeks in advance, and insist that they rehearse on their own so that we can have a 1 day, 3 hour rehearsal instead of getting together 3 different days in advance, which is usually not possible. So that's the time-saving aspect of it and money-saving. And it's also just in the arranging process and composing, the ability to cut and paste, the ability to take a chart that didn't work for the girl singer in G and put it in F or up in A flat, transposition. The technology, also the ability to hear with these wonderful playback programs. It's a great help for me to get an idea, if I'm writing an orchestral piece, how does it sound with the French horns and the strings as opposed to the muted trumpets and trombones, for example.
I agree with all of that.
Another step where
Yeah.
that's come about.
I used to play with a guy who used the phrase when a gig went really bad or a chart went bad or a rehearsal, whatever. He said, well, that was a train wreck. Can you recall any train wrecks in your career?
Well, there have been times on gigs when I've kicked off a tune too fast, or somebody came in wrong at the top, and we just stop without embarrassment and say, take two. And the audience laughs and we continue. That's not really a train wreck. A real train wreck, I'm trying to think on the gig. One doesn't come to mind. I've been on gigs where things have been wrong with the instrument and it's been terrible. Like I played a whole gig without the sustain pedal once, which as a player that's next to impossible. Especially on a ballad.
Yeah, that is tough.
And I walked into a gig once in Los Angeles, a club date, and the piano was covered, the lid was not up, and the tenor and the tenor register and bass register, the keys were going down and sticking and not coming back up. And I opened up the lid, and obviously this was on the first tune, and there was a plate of overturned dried spaghetti and meatballs on the strings. I can't imagine how it got there. So I told the waiter, please bust this piano, and we continued.
That qualifies as a train wreck to me.
I'll tell you, it wasn't a train wreck. This was a real learning experience about being prepared. I was very young. Rosemary Clooney's pianist, Paul Moore, got sick and couldn't make the gig in Australia, and I got the call through her drummer. And I'd never worked with a big band, and I hadn't worked with that many singers. And I didn't think, I just didn't know, and nobody told me, call their office and get the scores to the big band charts that you're going to be playing and you're going to be counting and, conducting. I didn't know to do that, and we got to Australia and we went to the first rehearsal, and I had no idea what to do. And I was terribly embarrassed, and the house band leader came to my rescue and led the rehearsal, and that was a real lesson to me to dummy, prepare properly in advance. That was a train wreck in my mind. That was a very embarrassing situation and frightened me, and I had to deal with it in therapy for a while to move past that.
I bet it never happened to you again.
It didn't. And I talked to young people in clinics and informally about stage fright. And talk about this aspect, I say, often we feel nervous if we're not prepared. If we you had the music in advance and we thought we had it covered, and whoops, here's a difficult passage that we should have written the fingering down for and put a metronome on and played it at tempo and nailed it in advance so that you're comfortable with it in performance.
Yeah, more good advice. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I want to congratulate you on your latest recording. It's called Soundscape. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. And that you'll be promoting that on gigs, I assume.
Yes, I'll be selling it on gigs. Nobody buys CDs anymore because they don't have CD players. And it's available, or will be soon, I guess, on Bandcamp and places like that. But that's a whole other thing about the music business. Where are we going with so many folks being used to downloading music, streaming music, and so many people becoming used to getting stuff for free? Why should I plunk down $15 if I can hear him, if I can hear his album on this platform or another one? I'm a big believer in the streaming house concert, and I think that COVID brought that to the fore, and people learned that they could get a couple good cameras and mics and do a very nice production from their music room. Something I'm thinking of doing in the new year, maybe doing an every other month concert from the music room, and people can donate what they'd like, and we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today. I really
I've
enjoyed it.
enjoyed it. So speaking with you, thank you much.
Right. I'll sign out and we'll can just say our goodbyes.
Thanks.